You good? Okay, well, I can hear the bell out there, so I think that means it's time to get started here. This is, by far, as you guys can see, the largest panel of the conference, and we have some of the best-known leaders in the industry up here. For those of you who've been doing this a long time, I know a lot of the faces on this panel are familiar, so I'm not going to do detailed introductions of everyone. Instead, I'm going to give everyone here to my left, an optional 3 minutes to talk about who they are, why they're here, and anything else that they want to say. And after that, I've got a list of questions that I want to pose to the entire group. As people have responses, they can jump in. And then I'm going to take some questions from the audience. So rather than take any longer, there are microphones on that couch. I think people might, there you are. So we'll start with Bob. We'll work right to left, and we'll work our way down. If you want to give 2 minutes about your organization or who you are, your background, whatever, please feel free. If you don't want, and you just want to hear what this audience and what troublesome questions I have up here, please feel free to just pass the mic and say, hey, here's who I am, on to the next person. So Bob, go for it.
Sure, well, maybe a minute. And then it'll get better as we go. So I'm Bob Richards, and I think I'm the only renegade non-U.S. citizen on the deck here, is that right? So the irony is maybe not lost, but I am here in the United States, and particularly here in California, Silicon Valley, because this is the place where space is happening. The force of gravity is not able to keep down the force of entrepreneurship that is going to give us the perpetuity we need as we move our economic sphere outwards. My passion has always been Mars. But the tactic and the destination that I'm focused on right now is the moon, which I think is a very important piece of the puzzle we need in the large tapestry of continuing commercial space.
So I'm George Neal from the FAA, and before we get into the Q&As, I wanted to take a minute to point out to those of you who may not be aware that today actually marks the anniversary of a very important day in the history of the British government. It was 69 years ago today, on July 26, 1945, that Winston Churchill stepped down as Prime Minister. After he had successfully led England through some of its darkest days ever during World War II, ungrateful voters decided to toss him out of office and try somebody else that was new. Now, there's a lot of great Churchill quotes out there, but one of my favorites is his observation that a politician needs the ability to foretell what is going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month, and next year. And to have the ability afterwards to explain why it didn't happen. Now, that's a skill that would really come in handy for those of us who are trying to predict future happenings in commercial space. But speaking of the British government, last week I had the opportunity to attend the Farnborough Air Show, and one of the highlights, at least for me, was the opportunity to sign a memorandum of cooperation on commercial space transportation between the FAA, the UK Department of Transportation, the UK Space Agency, and the Civil Aviation Authority. And the Brits have decided that commercial space is the next big thing in terms of both technology development and economic growth, and they want the UK to play a leadership role. Having just completed an 18-month study on the state of the market, the industry, and existing and potential opportunities, they have established the goal of capturing 10% of the global space business by the year 2030, which they believe could result in the creation of over 100,000 new jobs. They focused on the operation of space planes as an enabler for space tourism, for conducting scientific research, for the launch of small satellites, and they've identified 8 potential spaceport sites with the goal of commencing operations by 2018. Now, as part of the cooperative agreement, we'll be exchanging ideas with them on the need for changes to policy, law, and regulations, sharing non-proprietary safety data, and identifying promising areas of research and collaboration. But what is particularly gratifying to me is that to meet these ambitious goals, the British government has decided to base at least their initial operations on the US model, in which the FAA uses launch licenses and an informed consent regime rather than certification as the basis for our regulatory approach. I think that will provide significant benefits both for US companies, who will be providing most of the products and services that will be used in the UK, and for industry as a whole. Now, just a quick preview of some of the exciting things that will be taking place in the next year on our side of the pond. In the next month or two, the FAA is going to be publishing a compilation of recommended practices for human spaceflight occupant safety. These are not regulations, they're not requirements, but we hope the document will help to facilitate discussions between government, industry, and academia on how to improve the safety of commercial human spaceflight. Now, in August, NASA plans to select one or more companies to provide commercial crew transportation services to take NASA astronauts back and forth to the International Space Stations on FAA licensed launches. And within the next 12 months, I expect to see the long-awaited start of suborbital space tourism, with private citizens being able to buy a ticket and then have the opportunity to travel to the edge of space. So it's going to be an exciting year.
Well, I think it's comforting to listen to George say that in the regulatory world, Europe is going to follow the U.S. rather than the other way around, which I think is a comforting news for this. I'm Rich Pornell with NanoRacks, and it's always great coming here. I've been coming to NewSpace conferences for longer than I want to think about, but it's very comforting to see. I think the big difference that we see now is that within the past 10 years, we saw a lot of people start space companies, and that was really exciting, but there's a difference between having a company and having a business. And I think the sign of success is that you're seeing a lot more successful businesses in the commercial space industry. And so we want to see what we can do to continue that winning streak. So it's always exciting to see what everyone's doing here. And I think it's great for everyone, for business-wise, as we build the ecosystem. And I think it's always a discussion we want to have of how can we grow this whole thing better and how we can do it together.
Hey, I'm Gwen Shotwell. I'm with SpaceX. Happy to be here and looking forward to your really hard questions.
I'm James Reuter. I'm from the Space Technology Mission Directorate at NASA, one of the 4 mission directorates. And I'm really interested to hear a good discussion today on how we could do technology development, not just for NASA or for the US government, but for the commercial sector, and how we would endeavor in partnerships to make that happen. Not just NASA does it alone or the government does it alone, either for the government or for the commercial sector, but together that we would actually be able to get these things done. So that's my interest here today.
I'm Alex Saltman. I'm with the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. Those are good words to hear. We've been engaging as we can with NASA technology on this. The question of cooperative technology development. If you don't know, the CSF is a trade association of space companies, new space companies, and if you'd like to know more about what we do, we do a lot of policy work. We bring together our members, which include many of the people up here, to talk about policy and present a united front in DC, among other things. So feel free to come up and talk to me afterwards if you're curious about that.
Hi, I'm Craig Gravel. I'm the Senior Director of Advanced Development for Sierra Nevada Corporation. And what I'm doing is mostly looking at the Dream Chaser vehicle, but other things as well, but the Dream Chaser vehicle, and looking for different applications and different missions that we could do with it. One of the things I would have shown on a view graph if I had the time before this would have been one chart essentially that we created, and I got to give kudos to Charles Miller who helped with this. But it basically showed Dream Chaser next to a deep space vehicle. And I thought that juxtaposition is kind of what I think we need to take this discussion to a large extent, showing the commercial to LEO and actually the space exploration by government entities that are doing that primarily today. I put on that chart, I added words to that chart from Robert Heinlein that said, once you reach low Earth orbit, you're halfway to anywhere in the solar system. And I think that's a lot of the LEO mission the LEO is really come a long ways, and it's becoming much more, I'm not going to use the word routine, but much more operational. And I think now we can basically set up a beachhead or a front at low Earth orbit that now we can go out into the solar system. But that commercial application that we're doing with Dream Chaser and SpaceX and Boeing are looking at with their vehicles and orbital with the commercial resupply services, I think is the first step. And then that beachhead, that front, so to speak, would move further out. The supply lines go to it, goes to the moon and beyond. And I think that's an area of interest and one I would have probably wanted to key up as we go through the discussion today.
I'm Jeff Grayson, CEO of Xcore Aerospace, an occasional commentator on space policy. In a nutshell, Xcore's strategy for lowering the cost of space transportation is to first figure out how to make it cheap, reliable, and fly frequently, and then figure out how to scale up the performance until it goes orbital, rather than the other way around, which was sort of a virtue of necessity, because that's the only way you can do it if you don't start with $1 billion. And that's what we're about, and I look forward to your questions.
Dude, you have a great radio voice. I'm envious. My name is Greg Williams. I'm with NASA, representing the Human Exploration Operations Mission Directorate, which means if this is NewSpace, that I represent Old Space, or if you're an Isaac Asimov fan, the pervasive and ponderously slow galactic empire. But nevertheless, I'm really glad to be here. And as you've heard from various talks and panel discussions the last couple of days, we still have our uses at NASA, and we're here to listen as well as to engage with folks about how we can work together even better than we have in the past. I just wanted to mention briefly how in recent months we've been doing a great deal of thinking about what it would take to move beyond low Earth orbit into the solar system. Of course, we've been doing that for years, but thinking afresh about that for a number of reasons. But one of the things that we've come to in our thinking is that we're used to talking about exploration because, again, that it is our raison d'etre, our desire to move beyond into the solar system onto Mars. But we've, in recent months, undergone a shift in our thinking, I think. And it's because as we think about exploration, it's come to us that explorers tend to go, experience new places, and come back and tell their story. But what we want to do is we want to go and stay. We don't want to repeat Apollo. We want to go out of the outer solar system and be there for an extended period of time, for years and eventually generations. And so we've begun to have a shift in our thinking and even in our discussion from exploration to pioneering. What we really want to do, and this is why I'm excited about some of the conversations here the last couple of days, is pioneer space. And in practical terms, what that means for us is several things. First, it means going with partners, both internationally and commercially. Internationally, we have a long history of dialogue around and engagement via the space station. We are currently engaged with 14 or so other international space agencies and consortia under the rubric of the Global Exploration Roadmap, where we have each of the partner countries has identified their interests in space. We've put those together, and now that forms a basis in which bilateral, multilateral partnerships can then be formulated. And then, of course, commercially. If you were here yesterday, you heard Jason Crusan give a description of the kinds of things he's involved with. He's one of our leaders in innovative commercial partnerships, along with Phil McAllister, who's running the commercial crew program. Then I saw Alan Lindenmoyer come in. I'm gratified that he's being one of those honorees tonight for the success of the COTS program. These kind of partnerships are going to be essential if we're really going to be pioneering and not just exploring space. A second thing it means for us is a better alignment within NASA between my directorate, Human Exploration Operations, and James's in technology, and then the Science Mission Directorate, which likes to remind me that we're not just going to Mars, they're already at Mars. They've got vehicles on Mars, they've got vehicles around Mars, and we are, in recent months, really forcing a closer alignment of science, technology, and human exploration in NASA, because we know that what we need to accomplish, we need to accomplish together. And so I'm glad to see a new initiative in alignment on that front. You'll hear more about that in the very practical terms here within the next couple of weeks. The third thing it means for us is reusable space infrastructure. And what I mean by that is we don't want to be in the mode any longer of building single-purpose spacecraft. We want to build systems and spacecraft and place them beyond low Earth orbit in order to be able to use them again and again. So for example, you've heard some things about the asteroid redirect mission. We would love the solar electric powered bus for that mission be then repurposed, perhaps combined with a twin or a triplet of itself and pushed out into a mission to Phobos, for example. This is the kind of thinking that we need to be engaged in if we're going to have a space infrastructure that allows us to pioneer space as opposed to just explore it. And then, of course, we want to be, as we move out into the solar system, capitalizing on special orbits and Lagrange points and places that allow opportunities for minimum energy transfers so that we aren't in the mode of sort of the classic DRM-5 where we build a huge monolithic mission and push it to Mars, but rather can do things in a much more modular way that is not only more cost effective, but also, again, reusable, sustainable, and provides the kind of infrastructure capability that will push us on to Mars. And so I've been excited to be involved in some conversations and listen to discussions this last couple of days on particularly on the discussion around commercial partnerships. And I'm hoping that through the dialogue with the panel and questions from you folks that more of those lessons learned from partnerships will be driven out and maybe some new ideas thrown on the table. Thank you.
Okay, so here's how I'm planning on running this thing. I have a whole list of questions here, and I'm only going to ask a handful of them, maybe 2 or 3 to the panel. There's no particular order, though I will try to call on you, and let's be respectful of each other and get our different views in here. And then after that, I'm going to throw it out to the audience and take as many questions as we can. The only thing I would ask of the audience as you think about your questions is let's try and come up with questions that are aimed at multiple members that we have on stage here. I suppose what I'd like to avoid is a question that only addresses one of the people on stage. When is your vehicle going to achieve such and such performance, or when is this regulation coming out? Let's try to do something that actually engages everybody else here rather than focus on one member. So I'd like to start with the first one here. Historically, people talked about the U.S. space program. If you talk to folks who aren't in our little niche of the industry, they don't say space, they say the space program. And removing all my other hats and putting on just my Space Frontier Foundation hat, I'm going to remind everyone that space is a place, it's not a program. But the name of this panel that we thought sort of captured where I think things are starting to move, especially in the government-commercial interaction, is more of a space enterprise that involves commercial companies, that involves international linkages, that involves government contractors, involves the government itself. So in thinking about space, we're exploring the terminology of enterprise that implies a much larger linkage. So I think my question to the panel, and anybody feel free to drop in, is that a fair definition of where things are going, or is that completely wrong and I need to be thrown off stage?
As for Dyson, who's here in the front, she used to always say we have in this industry sort of a love-hate relationship with the government, in that you have very sort of iconoclastic people who start these companies and oftentimes say horrible things about the government. Yet at the same time, we've been very sort of dependent upon it. And I think one of the things that's happened is we sort of moved beyond that model. The thing that I think the X Prize really changed was that up until that point, you kind of had to be, if you were pro-space, you had to be pro-NASA. And so once the X Prize and then commercial companies came along with it, you can now sort of pick your own way to be it. And so it's no longer just simply if I'm pro-space, I'm pro-NASA or pro-whatever country that I have in my particular space program. And people can have more avenues for focus. And I think that's really led to a lot of people jumping into the business. And I think a lot of the enthusiasm is that there's more paths now rather than simply trying to make the astronaut corps or anything else.
Jeff?
All correct, and to which I would add, I think there's now an assumption in some government quarters that being pro-commercial space means in some sense that you're anti-NASA, which I think is absolutely incorrect. But what a theme I've seen coming out that I've heard a lot of conversations about at this conference has been, since most actors are both in favor of a robust commercial sector and in favor of a robust government activity in space, a conversation that's worth starting is, okay, what are the relevant roles and responsibilities of the various actors in the larger space enterprise? I certainly take unquestionably that they all have a role to fill, but I'm not sure that that discussion has percolated all the way down yet about, okay, we all agree on that, but what does that mean?
I was actually going to say that's my next question, was what might those roles be? So if anyone wants to take a crack at that or has a more general comment, please. So we only have a few mics. You just got to pass them and fight among
Yes.
yourselves.
Yeah, I think, one of the ways I think about this is in contrast to Apollo. So Apollo was essentially an enormous pyramid, a huge base of people and an effort that went into, at the very tip of the pyramid, putting 2 people on the moon a few times, let's say.
Several.
Several. And then, I think what's exciting about the new paradigm is that people are going in all sorts of different directions. There are different people doing different things. It's a ferment of activity. It's not linear. It's much more organic. And that is necessary for it to be long-term, for it to be sustainable. And that's what's exciting.
So I saw George had a comment, and then we'll go to you, Craig.
So even different parts of the government have different roles, but speaking for the FAA, I really feel good about our twofold mission, ensuring public safety. I think we're always going to want to look out for that, but also to encourage, facilitate, and promote commercial space transportation. So as we see the market change, evolve, mature over time, we're seeing some markets that are primarily government or maybe enabled by the government, commercial cargo, commercial crew, but which have some easily identifiable spin-offs to purely private use. And we see other missions, other markets that are primarily commercial, like suborbital space tourism, and even though they may have some government applications in terms of doing scientific research, demonstrations, and so forth, you're not going to see much government money in those suborbital vehicle development efforts today. So there's no one-size-fits-all in terms of how the roles and responsibilities are going to play out.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little bit to what Alex said too about Apollo. I mean, I witnessed Apollo. I was around then. I'm old enough to remember Apollo and what we did there. And to me, that was the space program. That's what I knew and what I was raised knowing. The other day, I went out with a few people from work, and there was interns there, and they were fascinated by this because in their mind, commercial's what it's all about, and they did not realize there was a government space program. It's not as pervasive as it is to me from my generation, I think. And what it tells me is my generation has to kind of get with it and understand this is really where it's going. The commercial side is really where it's going. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my third follow-on question would be, if there are all these different players filling all these different roles, and part of what's happening is kind of the shakeout of understanding who does what's missing? Are there obvious things that we look at today, or are there less obvious things? But are there things that each of you are thinking about saying, this part of it's still really not here yet? What are those parts? And I know Jeff's got one, so I'll let him start. But other people, please jump in.
I have a couple, so I will tick them off only briefly. There's a thing that we've never done, which is managing the development of space for economic purposes. And there's clearly some government role to that. If there are mining claims or any kind of property rights regimes, that's administered somewhere. It's a government function. It is not obvious that that is a NASA function. It is not obvious that that's a Department of Transportation function. That there is probably a stakeholder or stakeholders in government that doesn't know they're part of the space enterprise yet. And that's one conversation that's missing. Another conversation that has been going on without explicit assumptions, I think, is human exploration is difficult to manage purely as a for-profit enterprise. You know, it may or may not be possible, it may or may not be impossible, but it's certainly difficult. There's a whole range of roles that government can play in that range purely from they write the checks and private entities plant the flags, to it's an entirely centrally planned enterprise, state-controlled, state-conducted, and state-operated. But there's an entire spectrum in between those two extremes, and I don't propose an answer for that, but I don't think the debate on that has started serious engagement yet, because most players are assuming that one point on that spectrum is the right answer.
Yeah, I was just say I would certainly agree with that. Part of the difficulty is that the ground is never stable under our feet. Right? It changes over time. It has changed. It is changing. It'll continue to change. It even makes it tough to go back to first principles. Right? The first principles would say that that government does what industry is not ready to do yet. Government does what is required in order to maintain or establish a stable regulatory regime, meet safety requirements and so on. But even there, the ground shifts rapidly and things are tough to sort out. Basically, the way we at NASA are thinking about it, at least in terms of human exploration, is that we feel like we have a role in pushing beyond LEO and leading that charge. We have in LEO an enabling role where we want to use the space station, for example, to help foster commercial market in space, but we believe that the next space station ought to be commercially provided, commercially run, commercially accessed, that we wouldn't have to do another one. But at every stage that we're involved, there's room for commercial partnerships that are productive and achieve our common goals. But there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, and there's not one answer that works all the time.
I'd like to shift the discussion just a tiny bit. I think the place that's least understood, least organized, least thought about is settlement on another planet like Mars. I know at SpaceX, I don't think there's an employee who doesn't think at least once a day about the vehicles and the transportation systems that are going to take us to Mars. But a settlement on Mars is so much more than the flight there. What does life look like on Mars? A brand new place, brand new culture, brand new society, and there's so much there to think about and talk about. I think that's where the gaps are. I think space right now is pretty well defined, low Earth orbit, launches. I think it's pretty well defined. I think we should kind of apply our knowledge and our vision to, what is Mars going to look like?
Rich, I'll let you have your one, and then I want to give a response to Gwen's stuff. Not a response, but use that to jog some more conversation. So you got your first.
I think when you ask originally what's missing, I think the really thing we're missing is a horse to bet on. And that is, we're sort of, just to throw too many more analogies, we're the dog that caught the car with cots. We got it, it worked, it was great. So what do we get behind next? I think there's no question, obviously we want that. We want to continue to build on our successes.
When you say we, do you mean
as a community?
The community? As
a community, what's the successor to COTS? It's, I think, really what it comes down to.
As far as?
What's missing?
Okay. I think I'm just going to have to turn and shift to Gwen's conversation, because you can't say settlement in this room and not have us go, okay, yeah, we need to talk about this a little bit.
So I'm going to follow up a little bit on that.
On Gwen's stuff or on Rich?
Gwen's conversation is that, if you contrast back to the earlier discussion about Apollo and the pyramid approach, there wasn't a question within the community of what we were going to go do. Everybody sort of had one vision, one goal, and pursued it. Space is not that today. There are various folks that want to pursue very, very different aspects of that. And there are highly opinionated positions on that that are reflected in this room, even reflected on stage here.
Strong opinions in this group, you sure?
Well, it's a good and a bad thing, right?
Right.
Because the moment that, something coalesces to the point where, hey, we're going to go try to do this, whether it's within the government or even in the private sector, commercial sector, a whole bunch of other people will jump up and say, no, you can't do that, you got to do something else. And I think one thing that's missing, while that tension is very healthy, right? But one thing that's missing is an ability to get past that and actually, execute on things that we decide to go do as a community. Whether that be settlement of Mars, hey, that's what we're going to go do. Let's make the decision and go and move out in that direction without everybody else in the community trying to tear it down again.
So your implication would be, without the other third of the room who argues that, no, we've got to settle the moon, no, we've got to settle
I'm saying that
asteroids. Is your
there's
implication?
actually space for multiple things to happen concurrently without the monolithic Apollo approach where it all had to be one thing. If there is breathing space here, maybe not in space, but here at least, for those ideas to advance and not be so critical of each other's various different positions. So I would propose that that's something that is missing within our community. It's very easy for our community to attack each other's ideas. It's not so easy with the diversity of ideas today to be supportive of the diversity that's out there.
So, Jeff, I thought you had one you wanted to.
I want to leverage very strongly off of what you were just saying. There are a lot of missing pieces of technology or infrastructure or capability that, if pursued and brought to fruition, would lift all boats. There are things that would be useful whether you're going to the moon or to the Mars or to asteroids or what have you. And personally, one of my great frustrations as an observer of NASA is in your bailiwick, because it's very easy to find critical technologies that need to be brought to maturity or critical system demonstrations that could be made that would enable the technology readiness to improve for a whole range of missions. And yet those seldom seem to be the technology priorities that we have. The technology priorities that we have tend instead to be very strongly tied to the mission, to the central mission architecture of the day.
Okay, so that was kind of directed at me, so I'll respond. So when we stood up the Office of Chief Technologist and the Space Technology Mission Director, we were very careful to recognize that that's a recurrent problem of NASA technology programs, space technology programs. They come and go like the wind, right? We didn't want to go once again. We wanted to actually try to get things done. We did put out, a technology road mapping effort, and we, pulled in the NRC, not NASA, to set the priorities. Interestingly enough, everyone kind of took bets on what those priorities would be, and everybody was right. I mean, it's not so hard to figure out what your priorities are. And we are doing, within our limited budget space, what we can to advance those. But even when we say, here is the list of technologies that we're going to take from, the lab where they've been sitting for 20 years and get them into an in-space demonstration, there's this pecking order of trying to tear those down so somebody could get their pet idea in. And with the limited technology dollars that NASA does have, it's a very difficult political landmine field, right? That's why I bring up this, let's not try to tear some of these stuff down. Let's try to just get stuff done. There's room enough for all of us in that framework. So I would propose that we're trying to do those things. There's always room for criticism. Your favorite top 10 list is not going to be mine. It's not going to be the same as most of the people in this room, right? There might be a few. But but you know, we could argue over the details of that priority, but I bet you everybody will come up with the top 10 list. While the order may be different, the top 10 will be the same. So let's just move out on that. That's all I'm saying.
I think we get people behind that. Rich?
I think part of the reason why you have these fights is that the way you get your program funded is you kill somebody else's program. And so, I mean, it's all great to say, what are we going to agree on? But, I mean, I remember when Brett Alexander was pushing the original COTS program when he was in, I guess, the Bush White House. And the line he always used was, NASA has to give up the past to pay for the future. And so I think, you know, we can all try and figure out our top 10 list and see what we agree on, but there's probably a bottom 10 list we all agree needs to go. And so I think that's one of the things that we could probably, that it's going to happen one way or the other. The only way we're going to pay for this stuff is to kill something else. And so, you know, there has to be, I think, some agreement on what's the stuff that doesn't contribute so that we can move it towards the stuff that does contribute.
Anybody want to touch that?
I would just say I agree that we have to give up the past to look into the future. I mean, you know, Apollo was, we brought that up as an example here, was motivated by very different things than today. Apollo was not really motivated to go to the moon. It was motivated to beat the Russians. And that doesn't exist today. So the motivation has to be something different if we're going to go to Mars. What is it? Is it, and I think a lot of it is there's an interest at the personal level. People want to do this themselves. They want to go to Mars. They don't want to watch astronauts that are government employees necessarily go to Mars. They want to be able to experience it in a similar way, and I think that's
You're touching on my favorite topic, that if space is just about people who are better than you going to space, how is it interesting?
Correct.
If space is about me one day getting to go, that's a
Right.
different story.
And we're starting to, in low Earth orbit, we're starting to break into that. People are now, we're getting close to being able to send people to low Earth orbit, so we have to continue to move forward.
Right. Gwen, I saw you had a...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that you'd get some consistency in thought on what should and should not get done, or maybe what should not get done at NASA. But let's not go there. And what if we came together as a community and talked to our congressmen and our senators, or our representatives and our senators, about the fact that the $16 billion budget for NASA is ridiculous. It's so low. Why not finish out the old programs and adequately fund the new ones, and some ones we haven't even thought about? So then we don't have to go to this place where we're tearing down the architectures that have been envisioned for a decade or so, and there's enough resources to go do really new and incredible things. So it doesn't have to be kill that program to do this. I think if we came together as a community, we probably could get NASA more money. But we have to quit tearing and taking shots at the existing stuff.
I see Jeff's got a thought there.
You know, I've bent my pick a number of times on that particular front of trying to build up support for a bigger NASA budget. And I am all in favor of it, absolutely. But the challenge for that is that we and NASA together would need a much better story for why this time it will be different, for why this time what we're going to do is going to create a value proposition for more than the NASA centers and the traditional NASA contractors. Why is this going to be better for more of the country, and therefore more of the country should be willing to fund more of it?
And more of the country is funding. Venture capital in new space businesses is higher than it's ever been. I think it increased 400% last year. So it's happening. We're just such horrible cheerleaders and so horrible at talking about what we do and why it's so awesome and why it's exciting and why it's important.
But, you know, and I'm a NASA official, but I'll say this, is that it's also true, what was alluded to just a moment ago, that NASA's got to be part of a self-advocacy that's far improved compared to our story today. Our story today, not with or without the rest of you, doesn't sell as well as it could. I mean, it needs to be a better story. And I can tell you that a lot of us within NASA are really trying to think about that. But it is a very, very difficult situation to do that, because you're a government agency. You can't really try to promote yourself too much. You know, you run into all kinds of problems. But there's a deep recognition that we've got to do a better job of that. And if there's a way to do that in partnership with the rest of you here, I think that that would be a welcome approach, a breath of fresh air compared to, you know, everyone picking at each other's ideas and trying to fight for what the small pie is, and not thinking about, well, we could actually work from a bigger pie if that was our goal.
Okay. Is there one or two more? If people had a follow-up, I'm going to do that. Otherwise, I can take some questions from the audience. But
There's another piece. I mean, we could
Please.
say we have to beat the Russians and the Chinese since the U.S. can't take their own astronauts to space. I mean, there's that piece
There's a lot
that
of
is
messages
sitting
that
there.
you could use. There's a lot of messages you could use to build a better story. We're not leveraging all those approaches.
is there, and I'll put on my entrepreneur hat. Is there a practical thing that we're not doing as a community? I hear what you're saying, okay, I understand the messages are poor. I understand it's not well integrated. I hear what you're saying about we're bad cheerleaders, but I'm the young guy at the table, and I've already been part of maybe like 6 advocacy coalitions that tried to support one thing or another thing. Most of them were before all the iterations of all the companies that are here. And it seems like that kind of got us the same thing. Is there something mechanically, are there practical steps that we're not taking as a group? Is it about organization, money, messaging, all the above? Is there something practical that's missing? That's not just for Gwen, but please.
I don't think we reach out to other communities, right? The space community is not a huge community, and
Good.
it's not just us that are going to get NASA's budget, to the $22 to $25 billion a year place. We need, 50 or 60 million Americans to stand up and say this is something that's really important. That's why we always put our videos out on YouTube.
I'll give a small example. We were doing our normal industry tours, going to different industries, talking to them what Space Technology Mission Directorate is doing and what they're doing in the technology sector for space. And it's interesting, in 3 consecutive meetings with 3 different industry partners, they brought up the fact that they're doing university investments, fellowships, having interns, actually doing grants to universities. And I thought, well, NASA does these things as well. But we currently do not coordinate that at all between industry and NASA. Not strongly. There's a little bit of coordination, but not to the level that I think would be needed. But that's just an example of how, each of us individually going out to universities and trying to get more people, young people, interested in the space sector at the university level. If we do it all individually, we're not going to be as effective as if we try to have a more coherent story together.
I'll take 2 more comments, and then we're going to jump onto questions, because as you can see, there's 1 or 2 people who want to talk. There we go.
I think the one quick thing is that one of the things that's missing is there's a certain missing gap in how we get the message out. I'll say I know we're not the only company on this panel here that's gotten some heat for not giving enough information out to the public. And some of it is just simply for business reasons. You don't have time or the money or the effort to showcase what you're doing. And so, a lot of times we're just all sort of heads down, and we sort of skip over some of the public outreach stuff. And I think that's probably one of the gaps that's missing. And if there's some way to sort of bridge that gap where we've got all this cool information that we can get it out more, I think we could all do a better job of doing that.
Okay, I saw Jeff had 1 comment. We'll let Jeff have his comment while we get the mics in place.
Yes. I'm just going to give 2 examples. If we want to broaden the support and broaden the budget, we have to broaden the base.
Right.
We have to, and 2 examples of ways we could do that. And I know about the technology roadmap effort, and I've been a great supporter of it. But commercial industry was not a stakeholder that got to help prioritize where those NASA dollars went. Had it been so, you would have a much broader base of support that saw that they had something to gain from the increased budget for the NASA technology effort. And, you know, Congress people in districts that don't have traditional NASA contractors think, rightly or wrongly, that if NASA's budget goes up, that money will all be directed to the people who are getting the money now. Therefore, they, in my hope, would be incorrectly view that they have nothing to gain from pushing for an increased NASA budget. To the extent that NASA is able to link this approach of more commercial partnerships means that we're not going to know who the contractors are, means that there's a pretty good chance, Mr. Congressman, that somebody in your district might be one of those winners. That helps to broaden the base of support and provides the argument for which we should argue for more money.
Okay. We're going to slide on to questions. I have one baby ancillary comment to your suggestion about students and fellowships and internships. Something has fundamentally changed in the last year or two. I suspect it's all the activity at all the different companies in the industry. But speaking for this organization, we are awash in people begging to volunteer. We are turning away tens of students who want to help. And 10 years ago, when I ran this conference, we had 3. And now we are turning them away in the tens. And I'm sure the companies are having the same experience. You want us to turn away 1,000? No, I follow you. We're going to use the balance of our time for questions. We got about 40 minutes, and I'm sure you guys have good questions. I'm just going to go back and forth between the sides. So Esther, you're up.
Okay. In reaction to the who's missing or what's missing, the thing I heard mentioned once was when Steve Jurvetson talked about the synthetic biology conference. So to broaden that question, if we're going to go to Mars, we're going to need to figure out how to grow an atmosphere, not just how to build buildings. And it seems, and to feed people, it seems now's the time to reach out not just to synthetic biologists, but to agriculture. And there are lots of states that would be interested in that. Lots of people who are interested in doing far more efficient farming, perhaps not necessarily on the land. Any thoughts on that? Who's talked to these people? How can we, that would be a great industry to have as a partner. And it's one that's considered boring. I think they'd love the sex appeal of space.
As I do a lot of this stuff for fun when I can't work on the spaceship anymore. You know, I'm going through a design effort on a lunar hab right now, just for habitat design as a mental exercise. And you don't have to go very far into the engineering design before you quickly run into we don't know. You know, one of the most basic things I wanted to know is how much illumination do you have to give the plants during the lunar nighttime when the power is expensive to optimize the production of oxygen out of the greenhouse gas? Fairly fundamental question in design on Mars. Not a hard one to answer. One I can't find the answer to. You know, there is a lot more where that came from, and you know, USDA was just what I was thinking of. You know, surely there's an agricultural research station somewhere that would want to do this kind of work.
Okay. Gary.
With regard to the things our community has as a whole hasn't done, I note that in the real world of marketing, people make great efforts to find out what the customer wants. I know of no effort to find out what the general public wants from space. We keep telling them what we think they ought to want. Is there something we could do as a community to actually find that out? Because I know of only 2 demonstration surveys that were done in the Houston area about 10 years ago. And they put together their list of things. And in it, in both surveys, harvesting solar power in space came in strong first. Planetary protection from asteroids and comets came in strong second. Every one of our pet projects came in at in single digits, each one of them. I wouldn't suggest that we redirect all our policies towards those 2 priorities that happen to be in that one survey, but this does suggest that the general public might have a different value structure than is reflected in any of our policies. And we might want to find out if that has something to do with their anemic response to our great ideas.
That's a tough one, guys. Who wants it? Okay, Jeff, again.
All I will say is that my own experience in market research is that surveying target customers about their reaction to products and services that don't yet exist is not a very reliable predictor of what the product demand will be after it does exist. That doesn't tell me how to answer your question, but it does mean that I'm not sure that the survey thing is actually telling us anything.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer the question exactly either, but the results are kind of very interesting in the sense that they are things that people view as potentially benefiting mankind or protecting from an asteroid hit or solar power, as opposed to the exploration other purposes. So I think it's kind of interesting, the results. I don't know how to answer the question about paying more attention to that.
Rich, I saw you had.
I mean, I was going to say, I don't think fear or national security really work anymore. I mean, you know, the Chinese blew up a satellite. I mean, what more did we need to motivate ourselves, and nothing changed, you know? So I think that sort of, you know, fear kind of, we've got to beat somebody else kind of approach doesn't work. And I think what we alluded to earlier is that what does work is when people can begin to develop their own approaches that appeal to them. And I think part of that is, how do you expand beyond the community that we have? And so we see that with a lot of our customers, where a lot of the successful programs, especially in the educational world, they reach a lot more kids when they move beyond just simply engineering. They'll have a proposal contest, so they get the English department in. They'll have an art contest to get the art department in there. I think one of the neatest things is, it's probably some of that stuff's online, but if you've seen some of the Planet Labs art that they have on some of their satellites and things like that, it's very cool stuff. And so we need to, I mean, I remember even coming to these kinds of conferences, the thing we don't have anymore that we used to have lots of were art shows, you know. And so I think that that's, and I'm not saying that's the only one, but I think that part of the answer to get back to that is that you need to move beyond just simply arguments that and things that appeal to engineers and scientists, and move beyond that to other types of people.
You're up.
Let's not turn to the government to fund great ideas. Elon didn't, we have, obviously, government is a huge customer for us. We would not be the company we are today without NASA's support. But if you think you have a great idea and it leverages something associated with space, give it a shot. There's investment capital, there's venture capital, you could crowdsource. If it's a great idea, you'll get money to do it in today's environment. You probably couldn't have done it 10 years ago, but you can now.
Yeah, I'll give my 10 seconds as an entrepreneur. Gwen couldn't be more right on that point. 2-3 years ago, if you were looking for money to start a space business, good luck. Today, there's a lot around. There are people here at this conference that are looking to figure out where to put their money. There are, you know, we're also waist deep in entrepreneurs. This is a good place to start. That's a great point. Please.
From Seattle. Just haven't heard a lot about, I think somebody on the panel said that we're probably going to see the first space tourist launch this year, you know, being Virgin Galactic. And I'm kind of wondering, how do you guys see that event? I mean, is it going to be kind of the territory of rich people, and people are still going to say, well, you know, it isn't possible for me, or is it going to be a catalyst where people say, okay, here's a private citizen, albeit wealthy, but they were able to go up. That's something that I can do, and it becomes a catalyzing event. Or is there some risk there if it either doesn't go right, or if it pushes people further away from the idea of you know, going to space, where they say it's the territory of rich people. You know, thinking about, say, the Apollo 11 mission, where it was the pinnacle of what was happening, and you have 500 million people watching it around the world, and 1 million people live, you know, but it seemed to be really it was just downward from there in terms of, grand ambitions, though it seemed to catalyze a generation of engineers and other projects and people.
Let's say, George, you got that one first, and then Alex.
So I'm an optimist, but I really think that the start of space tourism is going to be an enabler and a transformational moment for space as a whole. And there's a number of reasons for that. One has to do even with safety itself. If you have to wait for 5 shuttle launches a year to gather all the data that you need to decide what kinds of designs work, it's going to take you a long time to get that feedback. When we're flying missions every day, hundreds of launches a year, thousands of people getting to fly, you're going to start learning things. And I believe a lot of those lessons will be applicable even to orbital space transportation. You mentioned the cost, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But again, I think that once we start seeing these flights happen, it's going to register on people that it's no longer just a handful of highly qualified, specially selected government employees who get to go to space. It's anybody who can afford to buy a ticket. And yes, it's expensive to start. I think there's a consensus that the price will start to come down. But when we see more and more regular people getting a chance to experience space, I think that's going to be very exciting. You look at the crowds that were out in Mojave for the winning of the X Prize, and that is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's going to happen. How many people have had their summer vacations or their big trip to go down to the Kennedy Space Center to see a big launch? That's great. Well, what if we've got a dozen spaceports across the country and then schools can routinely go out and watch rocket launches happen? This is really cool. So I believe it's going to be a key point in the development of all parts of the space sector.
Alex? You right?
Yeah, I mean, he pretty much said what I wanted to say. The only thing I would say is that many new technologies start as something for the rich. I was, for reasons I don't need to go into, I was reading recently about the beginning of the mechanical clock in development in Europe in the 1500s, and that's exactly how that started as well. They were playthings for the rich, and then every town decided they needed to have a clock, and then you weren't a serious town until you had a clock, and then every rich person wanted to have a watch, and sort of went from there. Now, of course, the depressing side of this is the Concorde, right? I mean, there are examples where this type of thing happens. It's available to the rich, and the efficiencies never take off, and it doesn't go where we want it to go. So I am on George's side here. I'm optimistic that we're going to be in the former rather than the latter.
So I'll start as an optimist and go from there. And caution not to overthink it too much, because it's about redefining the possible, right? When I was a kid and I saw the amazing things happen, I didn't think, oh, but. I thought, wow, I can do that. So I think we're thinking fairly linearly here, and we're seeing something happen that's really important to all of us. That's because we're actually on an exponential curve. So we need to keep doing what we're doing. Do the amazing things. Send the people to orbit. Talk about Mars. Look up and see lights in the moon. That's going to attract everybody to us, and it's going to redefine the future. And we'll see that popular culture come into it and start praising what we're doing. And we won't be looking back to the last 20 linear years. It'll be next 10 to 20 exponential years that all of this future is going to happen. So I think it's just keep doing what we're doing. It's amazing, and people are going to start noticing it.
I can tell a couple of people want to jump in on this one. So
I was
please.
just going to say, you got to start somewhere, and exactly what Alex said. Things start off expensive. It was expensive to fly the first airplanes across the Atlantic, and dangerous too. Yes, and now look where we're at. I mean, it's still expensive to fly across the Atlantic, but at least it's affordable to most people. So you got to start somewhere, and this is, I think, everywhere we're talking about.
Pass the mic down there for one more.
Yeah, I have to comment, especially because you're from Seattle, so which is my old stomping grounds. I agree with a lot of what has been said here. I think anytime somebody flies in space, there's going to be a sense of of optimism about it, about what the possibilities are for the future, and the common person being able to fly in space. The one contrarian note I want to sound has to do with this, comparing a rich person going into space with a selected government astronaut going into space. And what caused me to think about that is I lived through both the Challenger and Columbia disasters, and I think to myself, okay, why are those so rooted in the public imagination, where an airplane crash or a train crash or something from that same era, that same year, doesn't register except for people who may be related to those involved? And I think the answer is this, that in those missions of exploration, where people were doing things new, doing things as American astronauts, as government employees, it's because I think most Americans recognize that we selected them from among our number, and they in some real sense represented us in a way that a rich guy buying a ticket never will. So while I agree with all what's been said here, I look forward to the success of each one of these endeavors. I think we need to remember that this is, whether it's this program or some other one, America's space program, and all America ought to participate. And I think the question ought to go back to, how do we get more and more people to participate and be cognizant on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis of what we're doing and what you all are doing.
Here, I'll take my moderator's license for half a second, and then we'll move on to Ivan as the next question. The thing that if I have to throw one thing on this topic, what this whole group, knowing just about all of you, has fundamentally changed is that we've jump-started the process of progressively building the technology that drives price down. And that system that applies to just about every other industry out there has been broken in aerospace for most of its existence. And now we've begun the process of breaking down that system, and not just one company, all the companies are doing it. And that's what's moving us along. And the rich people thing is a first step that we've seen in other places. So there I go. The moderator got one in. Ivan, please.
Yeah, Ivan Rosenberg, the Aerospace and Defense Forums. I have a comment and a question. My comment is brief, and that is there's a big difference between three things. One is news, which NASA and space do well. Public outreach, which is done fairly poorly. And generating public buy-in, which is done almost none at all. And it's pent up. It wants somebody to speak it. But if you watch the Enterprise move through the streets of LA, you saw it pent up. But there's nothing organized to generate it. My question, I know this is about the US space enterprise, but given that the budget is likely to be at least a big battle, if not to be unsuccessful at changing it, given the trends in Congress, and given the huge expense of going to the moon and going to Mars, et cetera, what are the chances of an international space enterprise? Much as I think if you say the space station was successful, maybe building on that model. So the question I have is, one, is that desirable? Is that a place we should be looking? What's the pros and cons? And then what are the barriers to that, such as the four-letter word we've heard frequently used here over the last 3 days, ITAR, and the prohibition against even talking to the Chinese, where like Congress seems to pretend that if we put barriers up, that somehow the rest of the world is not going to discover what we know, and all that did is kill off the commercial spacecraft industry, commercial satellite industry. So that's my question. What's the pros and cons of having an international space enterprise, and the U.S. being the leader in putting that together?
I think a good place to start is the finding a way to continue on the IGA, the intergovernmental agreement that exists for the space station. Because in addition to having a mechanism for tying the ISS partner nations together, it also has two very critical components in it. Number one is certain, I wouldn't say relief, but differences in how you treat ITAR. There are certain aspects. When they were putting together the space station, the Russians basically said, look, there are two things we don't want. We don't want any involvement in ITAR, this thing will never work if we have to get involved in it. And then we also don't want to ever have to be dragged into an American court. And so the IGA also has cost waivers of liability. And so I think when you're talking about sort of international stuff, there's, if you're going to have some sort of Mars mission or anything else that involves multiple partners, especially be able to fund that this is a good place to start. And I know NASA has had some thoughts on sort of how do you continue and build on that success.
Yeah. Go ahead, Trey.
So I think there's a lot of different levels that the international participation can take place on. I started the panel with the talk about our agreement with the United Kingdom and the government there. Several of the folks on the panel, XCOR and Sierra Nevada, are both aggressively going out and signing agreements with other countries' governments or partners in those other countries in terms of how they can participate in, use the vehicles, partner, and so forth. And so those are even separate from the governments themselves.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one sort of historical thing, which is that because the International Space Station was international, because it had different partners, that was the reason why it was built in such a way that it could be resupplied in many different ways. The COTS program was able to happen because the ISS was designed so that it could be resupplied by the Russians, the Europeans, and the Japanese. And that meant adding a commercial player was relatively easy, though. Maybe not easy, sorry. Possible. I think that there are a lot of different opinions about the efficiency of international cooperation, but I think that is not really the way to look at it. It is true that when you have many different players, there are inefficiencies at the interfaces between all those players. I don't think ITAR, with the exception of the Chinese, who in the near future I don't see being part of something like that, I don't see ITAR being an enormous issue because NASA was able to get a carve-out for ISS and should be able to do that again. But I do think that it is very important to have all those partners involved because they all then have buy-in. They all then have their own political will to continue the program. And so when one falters, others can step in. And I think that's quite valuable.
Well, please, and then Jeff.
I'll just add to that and say that I think that the strong benefit of doing the international collaboration is the fact that you have sustainability. You know, it was very difficult to get the station built. It was redesigned several times, and it was, you know, successful attempts were made to actually cancel the whole program at points. But once it was developed as an international space station, it survived multiple administrations. It actually was successful in that structure. So even within the challenging budget situations in Washington for NASA and other government agencies, which is not unique to today. It's been, you know, here since the Apollo days for the space program. I think that, you know, a huge benefit is seen by doing international partnerships on large efforts that take a decade to do or more by doing it internationally, because it adds sustainability to it. And I would say with regard to the RTI question, it really comes down to just if you have technologies involved. So as a space technology guy, yeah, I have to deal with ITAR. But I don't think when it comes to missions, it's a big problem. And ISS is the example for saying that's true. You can do it.
When it comes to international collaboration or international programs, you can ask the same question of the same person and get two different answers depending on how you phrase it. So I want to draw the reason for that out. It's tied up with this spectrum of ways that government can lead an exploration activity. And it is a spectrum, but I'll simplify it as sort of the centrally planned, centrally managed approach versus a more of an open standards or market-driven or market player approach. If you do it centrally planned and then you make it multi-governmental, it becomes centrally planned factorial. And it is my strong opinion that whatever the virtues of making the program uncancelable may be, there's certainly no evidence that going out with that kind of an approach makes it cost any less for the US taxpayer than it would have cost. I would personally speculate that it winds up costing more for the US taxpayer, but with the added advantage, if you think about it as an advantage, that the program then can't be stopped. If you make it a more market-driven approach, exactly the same features that make it possible for US industry to be a participant at many levels of the program allows international industry to become a participant at many layers of the program. And you don't have to parcel out Airbus style or EADS style or Joint Strike Fighter style exactly which nation is going to do exactly which piece of exactly which system. If you structure it with open interfaces, for example, on how you're going to launch stuff, then anybody who has a launcher can launch stuff, and any nation who wishes to participate can take their share of the launch. So I think it can be a good or a bad thing, how you structure the program, and I think the things that make it likely to be a good thing are exactly the same things that make it likely to be a successful industrial thing as far as US participants are concerned.
So we've been talking about, sort of an international context here. And I've got to sort of throw one at you because it sort of jogged my thought process on this. The pinnacle example of international tends to be ISS. But I know everybody on this panel has opinions and thoughts about the ISS. And putting on my foundation hat again, not exactly elephant in the room, but the conversation that comes up around just about every bar conversation in this group is future of the ISS, particularly commercializing of the ISS eventually, possibly. Is that even possible? So that's something I know this group would want to hear about. So I know you guys have thoughts on that, so I'd love to hear some inputs on that. I got one. Probably ought to let him speak first.
Yeah, first of all, I would just say on the international thing, Google Global Exploration Roadmap. That's all I'll say about that. As far as ISS goes, you may be aware that in January we sought and received blessing from the White House to extend station operations through 2024. And the reasons for that are primarily twofold. One is we need ISS in order to conduct the human research that will allow us to go beyond LEO with humans. There's a well thought out roadmap by the Human Research Program that explains why we need at least that long to solve certain problems of the nature of maintaining human productivity and survivability in a deep space environment. But the other reason why we wanted to see extended is that we believe we need at least 10 years, and you guys are the ones that tell me this is right or wrong, we need at least another 10 years to demonstrate the commercial value of LEO for industrial commercial research. ISS is not going to be the only platform to enable that, hopefully. There'll be more and more of those. But we think that given that we have ISS there, that it only makes sense to use it as long as we can to provide a platform for commercial research. Now, we may go down this road and find that the folks just aren't there, but we're putting our money on the commercial world, not only providing access to ISS, but thinking of more innovative ways to demonstrate what they want to do in space, again, so that the next space station can be commercially provided.
Can't imagine there's only one comment on that. George, please.
Okay, so think back to the days of when we were talking about commercializing the shuttle, and that was seriously proposed, but I'm not sure it ever really made sense at the time. And yet now we have multiple companies eagerly awaiting the opportunity to provide transportation of people and cargo to low Earth orbit. So let's think about the model there. If you listen to Bill Gerstenmaier of NASA, he is very open and honest in saying, yes, we need to extend ISS, but ISS is going to be the last government space station. What comes after will be a commercial space station, whether that's Bigelow or some other creator and operator remains to be seen. But there's a trade-off there. We don't have to necessarily assume that is a commercial company going to, quote, take over ISS when the government's done. It may be better, more efficient, more high-tech, have more uses and applicability if you sort of start from scratch and crank in all the lessons we've learned through operating the ISS, but allow it to be industry-led.
Jeff?
I think those are the perfect two prior examples. And what I'd really like to see is that we learn the lesson from that. We keep building a government-developed, government-operated system to meet a government need, and then we are surprised when we can't find a commercial company to take this thing off our hands. You know, if all of the, we have so many future things we need to develop. If we could get in the habit of, right from the start, developing them saying, here is the government need, now can a commercial company supply a commercially operated asset to meet that government need, and also any private needs that you have, that path to transition would be a lot easier, and we could do it before we expended quite so much on the single-use asset.
I'll disagree with a little bit of what you said in that I think there is virtue in having an uncancelable program sometimes, in that space station is really the only stable part of government policy that exists. I mean, I know it's going to be there for 10 years. We can build our rockets to go to it around that and invest money. We have lots of customers that are investing in station, and we're doing it ourselves. And so, but I think one of the things that, I mean, I sure hope that there is an opportunity, that space station has commercial aspects to it. I think we're trying to do that in small pieces, and I think that's part of what makes our business work is that for now you can't, I mean, this is, I think, some of the things that some people are struggling with sort of building their own station, is that it's hard to fill the whole thing all in one shot. And so when you're able to sort of break it down into smaller pieces and be able to then build business from there, then you're able to end up with more than what you started with. And so I think that's one of the things that over the next 10 years about station, now that we have it, we want to sort of plan things around what is it that we can do with this asset that we're going to end up with more than when we started.
Okay. So I'm going to try to get a few more questions in from the audience. So,
great, thank you. My name is Royce Sigurd. I'm a social entrepreneur, currently experimenting at the Google Startup Weekend in order to get a good understanding of how the hacker space works, having a great experience of that. And there are 9 teams right now working on developing applications that pertain to space. So out at the Rainbow House, having a great time. What I wanted to talk about was the comments you made about outreach to the public. I have invested a lot of my time personally and a lot of money trying to explore what is it that's that's generating a lack of results. A lot of money's been thrown at STEM education, and how can we do better there? So I have committed myself to learning what's going on, how things, I'm a change management person, I am process improvement, I'm collecting a lot of notes. I've talked to a couple of you about an event that I'm sponsoring in LA because we don't have a major science festival. I'm putting one on, and would love to talk to the rest of you about that to help generate your future workforce and get kids excited about STEM study and careers. So anyways, I just want to let you know just one tidbit of information. I've been an entrepreneur. I've worked for venture-backed startups. It is just as, if not more difficult, being a social entrepreneur as it is being a startup trying to get venture funding and get going. So I'd like you all, as you talk about public outreach, to consider that there are smarter ways to do things than just throwing money out there, and I'd like to be part of that solution.
Got a question on this side?
Yeah. You guys touched on this a little bit, but I'm hoping to get you a little more specific. It seems to me that the goal ought to be to settle Mars and settle the moon and build free space settlements everywhere we can put them, probably co-orbiting with asteroids. And as an aside, I think we're a little over-fixated on Mars at the moment. But the question I have is, there are probably 3 or 4 or 5 things that need to be done that really help you in all those directions. Obviously, launch is one of them. Could you be a little more specific about what some of the other ones are?
So if you're talking about people, because there's a big difference here between robotic exploration and
Settlement.
people.
Settlement.
People. Then clearly, how you keep people healthy, not just transit there and back, but also there when you're in settlement. This really goes to what Gwen was talking about earlier, that we talk a lot about transportation. We talk a lot about how we're going to get there and how we're going to get back. But I do think that there's an underfocus on, how we're going to live when we're there, right? How we're going to do settlements. And, there was a comment on this side saying, when you think about that, even the simple things, you run into I don't know situations very quickly. So I think that's one of the big ones. If you go to transportation, which, look, if we're going to do it all with chemical propulsion systems, it is going to be inordinately expensive. We're going to have to find other ways of doing it. And I think that the biggest trick that we're all working on now is if you want to do settlements, then stage stuff there first. Don't try to do a monolithic mission where you got the lander, you got the habitat, you got the power system, you got the rocket to take you back, all in one big vehicle that goes there, right? I mean, break it up. Take things there ahead of time. And the way to take things there ahead of time, in an earlier panel, the discussion was, well, it could take 10 years to get there. It's fine. That's true. Solar electric propulsion is the cheap way to get things to destinations, aside from just the people. And so breaking that up is another big piece of what I think will help. And by the way, solar electric propulsion is very beneficial for commercial sectors, even geocom sector. There's a lot of big benefits there. So that's two. And I'm sure there are a lot of other people here that would have things to say about that, so I'm going to hand it to.
I joke a lot about the human psychology, and I joke to make a point and make people think about it. So you put 100 people on a school bus, and they're going to be on that school bus for, let's say we get this right, really right, and it's 3 months or 4 months to Mars. I mean, you can't get off and get a Slurpee at the 7-Eleven. You're stuck on the school bus for 4 months. So I know you said don't think about getting there and getting back. I mean, just think about the psychology of sitting in a bus for 4 months. So that's just to start thinking about all the stuff that we need to think about, just to start asking the questions, because there's a ton to do.
But if you have a settlement in Leo, then it's a couple of hours.
Yeah, it's not just about how do you get people to survive in space, but how do you get them to thrive in space? I mean, the thing we've discovered is that after the astronauts are in that station for more than 3-4 months, they get harder and harder to train to do the task properly. My dad said when he was talking to Buzz Aldrin years ago that one of the things he said was that when he was in zero gravity, he never felt quite right, that was something that he could do for a long time, but that when he was on the moon, and I'm not getting into that whole debate, but that when he was on the moon, he felt like this was something that he could do for a while. And so the challenge is that, if you've been on the bus for 6 months and now all of a sudden you've got to be Neil Armstrong and avoid that rock at the last minute, we're not sure we can right now currently prepare people to do that. So it's not just how do they survive, but how do you get them there in good shape?
Yeah, and there is a little bit of work on this based on actually folks who winter over at the South Pole Station. And the work there says that there's a lot of work still to be done. They go a little crazy. But the other thing I want to say, and maybe it doesn't even need to be said, is that what we really need in order to enable that kind of settlement is for people to be making a lot of money in space. And we are in a great place now where people are making more money in space, especially Gwen and her company are making more money in space than we ever have before. But it's still an order of magnitude or two lower than what we really need to get the type of settlement that you're talking about.
I see Jeff's got one, and then we'll grab another question.
There are 3 things that almost every day I get boggled that 50 years after we started flying into space, we still don't know. We still don't know how much gravity it takes for human beings to live and reproduce and have children and be healthy. we still don't know how much radiation shielding you need for human beings to live and reproduce and be healthy and have children. And we still never made anything of any kind ever anywhere on any other planet. All of which are things that we have to overcome before we're able to settle space, and are, in my mind, worthy challenges for a government-funded research effort.
That's good.
Yeah. Hi, Olympia Kyriopoulos from Telespazio Vega in Germany. So it's also maybe just a comment, thinking about the soccer World Cup, for example. Our team didn't get the cup or win it because of one Messi, but because of really strong individual players and keeping always the same goal in mind. So when I look now at the stage, I don't know all of you as individuals, but I'm in touch with some of you in doing business. So I'm just wondering, how is it possible that 9 strong persons like you, having so much experience in the aerospace industry, are not able to realize a strong goal? And is there a consortium on the commercial side? And maybe do you have some kind of, well, how to say, like a common strategic plan to approach these things? And one other comment on the ITAR issue. I mean, I've heard many times it's not possible to fly German or European payloads on board suborbital flights. But we realized 3 launch attempts actually with Armadillo Aerospace. We are also having some Pathfinder flights with X-Core in line, and these are non-US payloads. And there are ways on the legal side which are not hurting ITAR. So I think sometimes it shouldn't be a showstopper, but just to help you find a way how to walk around, but still reach the goal in a different way.
Maybe the reason why we all don't get along is we're not all Germans.
No, I don't believe it. I'm also not German, by the way. I'm a mixture of Greek, Polish, German, so I can talk about international relationship.
No, I mean, as the representative here of the trade association that brings a bunch of these people together, I think it's important to keep in mind that, maybe this is an American thought, that people work the hardest on the things that they own, on the projects that they own. And so the role we serve is on the sort of the greatest common denominator, on the things that everybody is facing, where we can come together. But for example, we have companies that are interested in doing activities on the moon, and we have companies that are interested in doing activities on asteroids. I don't think that's a conflict that we're going to resolve, but I think that's great because they're very passionate about what they're doing. And we have to keep in mind that, especially if you look at the last 5 years, space is never as fast as we would like it to be. It never, goes as fast as we would like it to be. But there has been a lot that has happened, and I think we're getting there, just not as fast as we hoped.
Please, another question.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Andrew Alexander. I'm with the International Space University. And first I had a comment. I wanted to agree and say that I think space marketing is really awful. Other industries besides space use space more than we use space to advertise, which is ridiculous. And for my question, I wanted to ask, do you think it's feasible for NASA and government, for government contractors and the industry to both together come up with a unified mission, a unified goal, and have that goal be insulated from changes in the government?
If I could jump in on your first issue here, because this has come up several times, and we're not ready to make an announcement, but this is something that we are very much thinking about at the CSF, better ways to communicate with the public, ways to show them that space is exciting again, that disappointments they may have suffered in the past are in the past, and we have exciting places to go. And so we're working on efforts in that direction. And if anybody wants to talk to me about them afterwards, please come on.
I can see. I get two or three comments here. So let's.
No, I was just going to say on your second question. I mean, NASA and obviously the industry need to work together. Commercial. NASA needs to lead. They've led us to low Earth orbit. They need to lead us forward from there, and we need to, be able to. I look at it as Lewis and Clark was a government-funded expedition, but people followed and settled the West. And that's kind of what I think we're talking about with regards to space and moving out into the solar system.
Right, but there's a Constellation program that got canceled and things like that. We don't know if this near Earth asteroid mission is going to be canceled or not. So I just was wondering if there's ways to insulate those changes from those changes.
Well, at the risk of being contradictory, I think you've begged the question. You've assumed the answer in your question, which is that you've assumed that what we need is a centrally planned single program, and is there a way that we can maintain central planning in the absence of the central planner? And the answer to that is no. We probably can't maintain central planning in the absence of the central planner. A state of affairs which seems not to trouble us in any other sector of the free world's economy. If we think more in terms of a market-driven approach or a market participant approach or an open standards approach, what we need to do instead is all get behind how do we develop the ecosystem or foster the economy where all of these things can be done. And on the private sector side, we all have different interests, we all have different goals, but it's very easy for us to get together in terms of fostering the ecosystem in which all of these activities can thrive. And I think that is a more productive paradigm than asking, can we maintain the program? Because I'm not sure there's going to ever be the program. But I think we'll do more when there isn't the program. I think we'll do more when there is the economy.
That's very much it.
I have to follow up on that. It says, many of the people who have quoted Churchill in this context, I'll have to do the same. One of the things he was famous for saying was that you can count on Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility. And that's, all I have to say is that we're going to move forward, but it's going to be in fits and starts. The fits and starts will be inevitable, but we will continue to move forward. And I think Jeff is exactly right, that one of the things that the commercial world can really bring is that kind of stability of goal. If they believe that the market is there, will be there in the future, that they can continue to pull forward and provide stability when government agencies are subject to the political winds that we inevitably are. So I think there's a great complementary nature there where we can really help each other move forward along those lines.
Okay, I'll take one more comment. I want to try to get 2 questions, and then we're going to be out of time.
Maybe that last question was driven by some of the things that I was saying earlier. And, I want to focus on Jeff's response to this, because I want to contrast where we are today and where we're heading with an Apollo-like program. I don't think an Apollo-like program has the space to operate in this kind of environment that we are in today. We're in a different place. And it requires, everybody here to be able to pursue different approaches to different goals and different destinations, and not just one monolithic approach. It's just that what I was getting at is that when a particular group, whether that be NASA or anybody else, goes after an approach, a goal, it shouldn't be torn down by the same community, right? I mean, we have more together to support the efforts that are underway and not be so hypercritical inward. I mean, we've got plenty to defend. We don't need to be our own worst enemies. That's all.
Okay. Go, and let's try to be quick. I'll try to fight the panel down to 1 or 2 comments.
So quite a few of the attendees here are students and virtually all the organizers. And it's a pretty influential group among students through SEDS, AIAA, and just organically. There are a lot of students that aren't in that core group that are starting to get excited about this. When I say that I spend every single day building a lunar lander with the goal of mining the moon, people, well, first they ask if I'm actually getting paid. And then they go towards, how do I get involved? So what is your elevator pitch that you want all the other students here to share with their fellow students? Say if you have 30 seconds at the bar and you say you're trying to mine the moon, or work with NASA, or work in the more civil space. What would you push out? What do you want us to push out?
So you have 15 seconds.
There's a lot of jobs out there. if you looked 3 years ago or 5 years ago coming out of college and you wanted to go into space, I knew a lot of kids who did that, who I talked to, who couldn't find a job in new space companies and in commercial space companies. There are maybe 10 times as many jobs available now. And people are hiring like crazy, and I think people should get involved that way. And you don't have to be an engineer, right? These are companies that need accountants and artists and all sorts of people. So I think everybody can be involved, and we need to convince them of that. And to a certain extent, we need to demonstrate that, but we need to convince them.
I think it needs to be sexier than jobs, sorry.
Yep.
I can't think of anything that is more inspirational than figuring out how to live somewhere other than Earth.
I see one down at the end, and we're moving on.
Space offers more than just that, though. I mean, it's not just where we could live besides this. It's understanding the universe. It's understanding other places or other planets where other people might actually already live,
But
right?
it's risk management.
It's
for
all of
humans.
those things.
It's risk management
But-
for human lives.
All right.
I do want to add, I think we talked about how the motivations are different today, and I think one of the things, your example is the economic benefits also is something that's different, I think, today than 40 years ago. Right. It was mostly national pride and that, and today, and you're thinking the right way in that direction.
First of all, I just want to say thank you, and for all of the students here who've worked so hard to put this on. This wouldn't have happened without you guys, so thank you. And the other thing I would say is that in the end, what this is all about is about creating the future. And who doesn't want to be involved in that? That's what I would say to them.
Sorry, my easy one is in NewSpace, you get to go. Okay, I'm feeling guilty because you've been standing here for like 25 minutes. Your question, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Hi, so I'm one of those students also, and I've been interning in the area at a tech company, and we constantly struggle with riding the line between the products we want to design and the products that people actually want to buy from us. So it sounds like we're having the same problem here. And what we found is, what I've learned this summer is that you really just have to ask like what the problems are and then see like how our technology fits the problem. So I just wanted like for some of you guys to speak on your like top, maybe like 2 or 3 problems you think that space can solve for humans looking ahead.
Okay, 2 people get to make comments, so you guys fight among yourselves. Who's it going to be? Well,
well, let me mention that climate change and environmental degradation on Earth are very important things, and we had a keynote here earlier today from Planet Labs, and they're not the only company. There are many others who are working on that problem, and I think that's key. The other thing I would say is key, though, is that you have to try things. You can't just search for the best solution. You have to try some of the ones that look pretty good and be willing to fail.
That's good. Somebody else? All right. Thank you so much to the panel. I think this is one of our strongest ones of the day. I know a lot of you will be around for the rest of the time. The thing I always try to say about this for myself, and I know for all the other panelists, we're all people, we're all approachable. If you have more questions, find us, talk to us. We're around. Thank you so much.